Right, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, or good morning if you're joining from the West Coast. My name is Wendy Carradine. I'm the operations manager for the Supply Chain Sustainability School here in the US. We're joined today by Jennifer from ISI, who's going to be taking us through a webinar on the Envision framework. Really excited to have ISI here today for this session. Sustainable infrastructure is obviously one of the core aspects of education within the supply chain sustainability school. So really pleased to be partnering with ISI on this. I'm just going to take you through a couple of housekeeping items before we make a start. So first and foremost, today's session is being recorded. Anyone in attendance today will receive a copy of the recording and the slides as well. If you do have any questions throughout today's session, I would encourage you to use the chat function. I'll be monitoring it throughout. If the question pertains to what we're talking about on the slide, we'll try to answer it in real time. Otherwise, there should be time at the end for us to answer any questions as a group or just get a conversation going. If you are a member of the Supply Chain Sustainability School and you are joining us through your account, you will receive your certificate of completion and your time will be tracked as well on your dashboard. If you have any problems with that, any technical issues, please reach out to me and I will be sure to sort you out. If you do have any other technical questions, if you get kicked off the call, if you're having any issues, you can contact me via my email or phone. I will be here monitoring and just providing support as we go along. Finally, a reminder that this actually is part of a series. This is webinar number 2 of 3. If you are interested in joining the third session, which is taking place on June 11th at 1 p.m., and that is all about actually implementing sustainable infrastructure in practice. So if you're not signed up for that session yet, we very much encourage you to do so. The information will be provided in an email that I'm circulating after the session. So with all of that said, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and enjoy today's session. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name's Jennifer Nanetti. I'm the Director of Research and Engagement for the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. And I'll talk about the Institute in just a minute, but I have a background with the AEC industry starting in construction when I was a baby, and then working for an architecture big A little E firm for about 10 years, and then working for an engineering consulting firm for about 12 years, working on and with the Envision framework for about 10 to 12 of those years. It kind of started just as I started with HDR, and we kind of grew up together. So that's my background. I'll talk a little bit about the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure first, so you can kind of understand where we're coming from, and for Envision. As a education and research nonprofit, the Institute, or ISI, manages the Envision framework. It was founded by kind of the alphabet soup of the industry in 2010. So ACEC, APWA, and ASCE all came together. They were all kind of looking for a rating system or looking at rating systems related to infrastructure. And they looked at something like 90 or 100 different rating systems around the world, some that were specific to buildings, some that were specific to geographies, some specific to sectors, and decided it might make the most sense to have one rating system and framework that covered all of civil infrastructure. And so they founded ISI, which then collaborated with the Zofnass program at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And together, ISI and the Zofnass program created Envision. The first version of it was introduced in 2012. And if you ever see anything about it, that's version 2. Version 1 was kind of the pilot that they worked with first. Version 3 was introduced in 2018. And then we're currently in the process of revising the existing manual with an anticipated release date of 2028. And in that interim, the Zofnass program, which used to be at Harvard, in 2022 came to ISI. So the Zofnass program is now a part of ISI, and we have a researcher who works with us under my program, actually, as the Director of Research and Engagement. And so that program pivoted a little bit from academic focus to an industry focus. So let's talk in little more detail about ISI. We have, as a nonprofit, we're free for public agencies and academic institutions to become members. We have a lot of AEC companies that are members, a lot of academic institutions that are involved, and a lot of public agencies, as well as other affiliate organizations and associations and things like that. That includes working with our membership program, research, as I mentioned, that came over from Harvard, our verification program, and I'll touch on that in a little while, and then a credentialing program that looks at education for anyone related to sustainability, as well as our Envision Sustainable Professional Credential. So kind of, a preface to why we're here today, really every infrastructure project creates outcomes, whether they're intentional or unintentional. The reason that something like a rating system or a framework is a good thing to have within projects. And measuring sustainability in infrastructure is really complex because infrastructure projects operate at such a large scale and over such long time horizons with so many stakeholders. They're often more than one project type. So you could have a stormwater project that is also a roadway project. And unlike single product or building projects, infrastructure systems really influence communities, ecosystems, economies, and public health for decades. Some projects that we're looking at being built today, they're really planning on being active and in operation for 100 years. At the same time, there's a lot of different stakeholders. As I mentioned, they might define project success very differently. And one group might prioritize schedule and the budget, more of those like traditional metrics, and others might focus on things like resilience, environmental impacts, or community benefits. And many organizations are struggling to translate those broad sustainability goals that they have into measurable outcomes and actions. It's one thing to say a project should be sustainable, and it's really another to define what that actually means in practice and how to evaluate it and be consistent consistent with other things that are happening within an organization. And that challenge is really why structured sustainability frameworks have become increasingly important in infrastructure planning and delivery. So frameworks do matter. They help organizations move sustainability from abstract aspirations, something that's theoretical, into something that can be evaluated, discussed, and integrated into decision-making. They provide shared structures and common languages for project teams. You'll probably hear me say some of these things multiple times over different slides in this presentation because they really are the most important things and often things that people that's not the first thing they consider when they think about a rating system or a framework. It's especially important for infrastructure projects where decisions are made across a lot of disciplines, a lot of phases over long periods of time. I was working on a project that's still ongoing for about 7 years before I got done with design, right before I came to ISI. And at that time, they anticipated construction would be done in 2035. And it's likely that that timeline will extend maybe even to 2040. So it's crazy to think that those decisions, those timelines, that's just design and construction. That doesn't even consider, the lifetime of the asset. So these frameworks help teams look beyond an individual project component and evaluate those broader outcomes. Things like resilience, community benefits, resource efficiency, and long-term performance. And really importantly, frameworks support more informed decision-making. So they help teams ask better questions, help them ask questions earlier in the process when decisions can really have the greatest impact on the project and on long-term impact. And this is where Envision provides value. As a comprehensive framework, it's specifically designed to ask those questions about infrastructure. So let's look a little more in depth about what Envision is. We call Envision a blueprint for fundamental change. It's also useful to think of it in the full extent of the project, so how projects are planned, evaluated, and delivered all the way through construction. At its core, Envision really enables a thorough examination of all sustainability and resiliency aspects of a project across the full range of environmental, social, and economic considerations. It provides a structured way for teams to evaluate how a project performs, not just today, not just quickly right after it opens, but really over the long term of the project. And importantly, Envision's not just about an assessment, it provides practical guidance on how to improve project performance. It has a lot of questions that project teams can use to really think through what they will be doing on a project. And it helps them, therefore, identify opportunities, evaluate trade-offs, and make more informed decisions throughout the development process. And that process alone really can contribute to stronger collaboration and drive better project management by aligning project teams around shared goals and measurable outcomes. And this aspect of the framework can shift sustainability from being a separate initiative to becoming part of the core project delivery process. And as Envision becomes more standard within the industry, I've really seen that happen. It felt like for a long time, Envision was somewhat of like a sidecar on a motorcycle, and then it became, something that was integrated into the project, and the Envision lead was helping to lead sustainability along with the other team leads, along with the other discipline leads. Envision's unique in a lot of ways, especially in that it was specifically developed for infrastructure. So if you look at it against other systems, you'll see that it asks questions that are really looking at upstream and downstream effects, and really considering the complex system level challenges that infrastructure projects can create. Unlike frameworks focused primarily on buildings, Envision applies broadly across horizontal infrastructure. So you can use it on any type of infrastructure, and I'll talk about the kind of sectors that it applies to in a minute. And that focus is important because these projects operate at much larger scales, involve a lot of more stakeholders, and really shape what communities are. After distinguishing aspects of Envision, its emphasis is really on the bottom line and balancing the triple bottom line goals. And it encourages project teams to think holistically about sustainability by not just considering environmental performance or any singular type of sustainability issue, but also issues like quality of life, long-term economic value, resilience. One of the things that I have often said in my presentations is each discipline often looks at sustainability in their own unique way. So a mechanical engineer might look at efficiency, and a structural engineer might think of the type of building materials for the structure. But Envision helps to get them kind of all on the same page about how the project overall is thinking about sustainability. It's also intentionally designed to evolve alongside the changing concept of sustainability and be able to evolve into as new concepts come in, but also be looking ahead to make sure that it's keeping pace with what's happening overall. So areas like climate resilience, equity, stakeholder engagement, and long-term risk reduction are built in. And it's intended to support those evolving priorities and encourage continuous improvement over time. Another key strength is really looking at the full project lifecycle. So it includes planning, design, construction, and then operations and maintenance considerations. And I'll provide some more detail on that in a few minutes. At the same time, it's organized to be flexible, so it can be used as a decision support tool in planning and design. It can integrate into the sustainability principles of any project. Projects can use it for free, but there is also an option to pursue third-party verification, which provides an independent validation of sustainability achievements and can enhance transparency, accountability, and credibility with stakeholders and communities. So depending on what the needs and goals of the project are, it can be used in different ways. And together, these elements make Envision a practical project tool and a comprehensive framework for advancing sustainability and resiliency in infrastructure. It's applicable to broadly across horizontal infrastructure, and it's being used on sectors like transportation, water, waste, energy, public spaces, and resilience projects. And as I mentioned before, projects are increasingly including multiple sectors. So a lot of times they're multi-benefit projects that include multiple different sectors, for instance, transportation and water, or land and environment, and waste. And that way, a single project with multiple components can use one rating system or framework to evaluate everything within their project. To provide a little bit of background, while it is applicable across all those sectors and other project types, transportation and water projects really currently are the largest users, with 50% of projects internationally, so all projects in the verification program being transportation projects, and then 30% being water projects. And honestly, water came out of initially, and many of the initial projects were water, because a lot of water projects are innately very sustainable. So it was easy for those projects to kind of fit into the framework. And transportation more recently has been applying Envision in greater numbers. So it's crept up over the last couple of years. And Envision while it started in North America and had projects initially in the United States and also Canada, it's increasingly being used by organizations around the world as interest in sustainable and resilient infrastructure grows everywhere. Today, it's being applied across a wide range of sectors and geographic regions by both public agencies, consultants, owners, contractors, academic institutions, and international adoption has really expanded in the last few years. For example, there are more than 20 verified projects in Italy now, and last year marked an important milestone for us with the first verified projects in Latin America. So there was a project in Guatemala and a project in Colombia that were verified last year, and there are 5 more projects in Colombia that are registered and some going through verification. So it's definitely really growing internationally. Overall, more than 200 projects have been verified through the verification process, reflecting also that growing recognition of the importance of measuring and improving infrastructure sustainable outcomes globally. So it's really encouraging to see that sustainability and resiliency are becoming increasingly integrated into infrastructure decision-making across different regions, project types, and also organizational contexts. Organizations use Envision for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest one is that it really helps to connect their sustainability goals to real project decisions and measurable outcomes. And Envision provides a structure to evaluate sustainability considerations that might otherwise be addressed inconsistently or overlooked entirely. So as I was mentioning, there's questions that are asked within the project process that help project teams holistically consider a broad range of sustainability indicators. And for some organizations, Envision supports internal goal setting and long-term planning. So it can kind of expand outside of what the project process does as well. For other projects, they like the idea that Envision helps to improve collaboration across project teams or providing more transparency. They also often like the idea of how it includes stakeholders and communities within the project process. It's also increasingly used to support resilience planning, funding initiatives, benchmarking efforts, and broader sustainability commitments. And while there aren't significant funding tied directly to Envision itself, Envision is really helpful for project teams that want to submit for funding mechanisms related to sustainability, because it can help them walk through and have conversations about all those sustainability indicators so that they have a better narrative to be able to explain the sustainability of the project for funders that want to understand how sustainability is impacting their projects. And as I mentioned before, it really provides this common language that helps owners, engineers, planners, contractors, stakeholders discuss sustainability in a more consistent way. And that shared understanding really has been seen to improve coordination, stakeholder engagement, and overall project alignment. So let's get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of what Envision is. If you are familiar with other rating systems, it's structured similarly with categories and credits that have criteria for various sustainability indicators, as I mentioned. Envision categories are quality of life, leadership, resource allocation, natural world, and climate and resilience. And there are 64 credits across the 5 categories. Overall, the criteria provides basically an evaluation lens for infrastructure sustainability. So I'm going to just give you a quick snapshot of all the credits. There won't be a quiz later. Envision uses credits as end performance indicators to evaluate sustainability outcomes. And projects are evaluated across all number of things, including environmental impacts, social impacts, resilience, resource use, leadership and process, and a variety of other topics. Yeah, if you can name them all by the end of the session, that would be really amazing. One of the unique aspects of Envision is how it approaches sustainable performance through levels of achievement. So each credit in the framework includes a scale that illustrates increasing levels of sustainable performance. And the levels of achievement, as shown here, are improved, enhanced, superior, conserving, and restorative. Improved representing performance that's just above conventional practice, while enhanced and superior reflect progressively stronger sustainability outcomes. At a conserving level, projects are aiming to achieve essentially a no net negative impact in that particular area. And then beyond that, the restorative level represents projects that are actively restoring or improving natural or social systems, rather than simply trying to reduce harm. Importantly, this is not a linear scale. The progression between levels is tied not only to points, but also to increasingly ambitious performance goals and guidance for sustainable improvement. The criteria for moving from one level to the next are designed to encourage incremental progress and continuous improvement. The framework recognizes the sustainability journey, that sustainability is a journey and not an all or nothing outcome. So this was always something that was really important for me to talk with about project teams, is that it's great to be super excited about something and want to go to a restorative level, but it's better for the project to be able to look at it more realistically and understand exactly what is available for the project, what is realistic for the project, so that you actually are able to do something, because you wouldn't want to have a really high expectation that you can't meet and then end up doing nothing at all. So Envision, that's really one of the reasons it can work effectively also across these different project types, because it encourages teams to make intentional decisions, identify achievable improvements, and continue advancing project performance over time. It also helps organizations that might want to start with one project, understand how they're applying Envision to it, and they're not going from 0 to 60 right away, but they can get an understanding of what happens within Envision or how Envision impacts and is applied to their project, and then do a little bit better the next time. So ultimately, the framework is focused on that progress and not perfection, and helping projects move meaningfully beyond that conventional practice toward more sustainable and resilient outcomes. I did want to touch just really quickly on a comparison with LEED, because I do know that a lot of people are familiar with LEED. So it's often helpful to compare the two frameworks. And I do have this picture at the right-hand side, obviously isn't very legible, but this document does exist on our website if anybody wants to look at it in more detail. But LEED, of course, primarily focuses on buildings and vertical infrastructure. while Envision is specifically developed for horizontal and civil infrastructure. And that distinction is important because infrastructure projects operate differently, they create different impacts at much different scale, a broader and community scales. And that means that Envision has to look beyond the performance of the individual structure and really consider issues like quality of life, resilience, ecosystem impacts, stakeholder engagement, and long-term infrastructure performance. And the two frameworks, though, aren't competing. They are complementary. And in fact, many organizations use both of them depending on the type of project they're delivering. I worked on several transit projects where the alignment was a Envision project and the either operations and maintenance facility or the transit stations were lead facilities. So it really depends on the project owner as to how they use them. So back to infrastructure a little bit, infrastructure projects kind of hammering this home, I guess. Infrastructure projects require the different sustainability framework because of this broad impact that they have. The interconnections between the various types of projects is really important. And just looking at how infrastructure systems shape how communities function, they influence mobility, access to resources, economic development, environmental conditions, and resilience to future risks. They also tend to operate over decades, which means decisions made during planning and design can affect generations of users and communities. And because of that scale and complexity, evaluating infrastructure sustainability requires looking beyond the individual assets and considering systems level outcomes, things like adaptability, long-term resilience, social equity, and regional impacts. That broader perspective is one of the key reasons Envision was developed specifically for infrastructure. So now I'm going to take a little bit of time to look at how Envision functions throughout the different project phases. So first, as a project process tool, I think Envision is really important. I'm actually writing a white paper about this right now. And while Envision is often recognized as a sustainability framework, it's equally valuable as a process tool that helps project teams improve how decisions are made. And one of the first ways it adds value is by helping teams establish sustainability and resiliency goals, giving them kind of a framework to have those conversations. And Envision encourages projects to align those goals not only with organizational priorities, but also with broader community needs and long-term outcomes. Asking project teams to go look at, what has been done within the community, what the community is looking for, and things like strategic plans and climate action plans and things like that. And it also supports process improvement by creating a more collaborative project environment. Infrastructure projects involve a lot of disciplines, many perspectives, many stakeholders, and Envision encourages contributions from across that full project team. Things like asking operations and maintenance staff to come in and talk about what their needs are going to be during the operations and maintenance process. It also promotes more inclusivity in assessments by encouraging teams to evaluate the full triple bottom line impacts and benefits, not just technical or financial considerations. And perhaps most importantly, it helps guide decision making. So infrastructure projects often involve complex trade-offs between competing priorities, budgets, risks, and community expectations. And the framework helps teams evaluate those trade-offs more systematically by identifying priorities and comparing options against a common scale and supporting decisions at both the project and broader systems level. And Envision doesn't have any prerequisites or any credits that are required. So it does allow project teams to pursue the credits that are most relevant to a project, and that can help in making those trade-off decisions. So sometimes if one thing has to be done, other things you're not able to do other things. And Envision recognizes that and realizes that you to do one thing, you might not be able to do some others. And so it doesn't penalize teams that are unable to do some of those other things. Ultimately, the point is that Envision helps project teams move from isolated decision making toward really more holistic and intentional approach. So that's kind of similar to as a planning tool, but there are some more nuances that come during planning specifically. So it can really play an important role as a tool by helping organizations think more strategically at early stages of project development. And one important aspect is stakeholder engagement. And I know I've mentioned this multiple times already, but it really encourages project teams to better understand who might be affected by a project and how the different perspectives are represented in decision making. And that includes considerations related to recognitional and procedural equity, essentially making sure that diverse communities and stakeholders are acknowledged, included, and meaningfully engaged throughout the process. And another key is that sustainability is not just about doing the project right. One of the tenets of Envision is about doing the right project. So making sure that conversations are held really early to make sure that the right project is the one that's being planned. Envision includes criteria that encourage organizations to incorporate those triple bottom line considerations into the project selection process so that sustainability is considered before major project decisions are locked in. It can also help inform environmental assessment activities. There's often significant synergy between environmental review processes that are mandatory for a lot of projects and Envision criteria. We'll have a project or a white paper coming out soon that looks at the comparison of NEPA to Envision. And there is just an amazing amount of synergy across things like stakeholder engagement, impact assessment, resilience considerations, and that documentation can support Envision documentation for projects that are going through verification. I was always super excited to be able to see just a really thorough document was done for environmental documentation and dig into that for Envision documentation. And it can be even more beneficial if those conversations are happening early to make sure the synergies are really brought out by good coordination. Using Envision during planning can also help organizations move beyond a reactive decision making and really be more proactive and have a better systems-based approach for that. During design is where a lot of people think that it mostly comes in. Envision, probably is mostly helpful during design. And I did a document last year called the Envision Credit Navigator, which really looks at where credits are most useful, where credits and criteria are most useful across the project process. And it shows a good balance between, the kickoff initiation of a project, the planning phase, the design phase into construction documents, and then construction itself. So people who use Envision really do benefit if they're using it early because you get the most impact from using it. But in the design phase, certainly a very useful tool as well. It helps project teams really move the sustainability discussions that they've been having, hopefully, into broad goals, from those broad goals into practical design decisions. So it helps provide just a series of questions and performance objectives. This is where it gets into more quantitative types of metrics versus qualitative, which you might have for things more related to quality of life or leadership. This gets into more of the natural world and resource allocation types of credits. But it also really emphasizes the strength of Envision in supporting the incremental improvements. So teams don't necessarily need to completely redesign a project to make meaningful progress. Often they can make small intentional design decisions that collectively create significant long-term benefits. For example, project teams may evaluate opportunities related to vegetation by considering native or non-invasive species or more natural approaches to landscape management. They could explore roof strategies such as vegetative roofs, solar integration, or high reflectance materials to improve energy performance and reduce heat impacts. Stormwater discussions might include options like rain gardens, bioswales, or cisterns to improve water management and resilience. Envision also encourages broader conversations around mobility, public space, and preserving local culture and community, recognizing that infrastructure designs affect how people experience and interact with their environment. This project that's pictured is particularly interesting, I think. It's a power plant in Holland, Michigan, but they also had, green roofs. They had an extensive trail network that connected to a regional trail. They have an education center within the facility. So they kind of hit on a lot of things that weren't necessarily directly related to a power plant. And, that just really shows how Envision can push teams to think beyond those direct project functions by evaluating lots of different things: light pollution, noise, public safety, energy efficiency, renewable energy opportunities. And just, again, asking all of those questions provides a conversation for them to have to make sure that they're not missing something and all of those ideas have been brought up. Within construction, there are 5 credits that particularly directly address construction. So Envision can help project teams reduce impacts during project delivery and better integrate sustainable considerations through all different kinds of construction practices. So aside from those 5 credits that specifically focus on minimizing construction impacts, there are more than 20 credits that have a construction component depending on the level of achievement that's pursued. And these address areas like resource management, pollution prevention, waste reduction, energy use, community impacts, and protecting natural systems during construction. Many of these are considerations that can be incorporated directly into construction documents and project specifications to establish those expectations early and create better alignment between the project goals and the construction activities. But the most successful outcomes really can occur when contractors are involved in those sustainability considerations. So if it's not a design bid build process necessarily, and you have a contractor on board, and they can have conversations about what's practical, achievable, and realistic, and also bring new ideas to the project, because sometimes the designer may not know that there are other better ideas available that can reduce some of these impacts. So Envision is there to support those collaborative conversations, so sustainability becomes a part of project delivery and not just a part of documentation. And it encourages teams to think about construction not just as an implementation phase, but as an important opportunity to reduce impacts and improve overall project performance. And then while Envision doesn't have a separate operations and maintenance module or an existing infrastructure assessment program, many elements within the framework help prepare projects for more sustainable long-term operation and maintenance. So operations and maintenance is really consideration in the planning and design of the project so that it is successful in operation. And one of the key strengths of Envision is that it really encourages project teams to think beyond the immediate project delivery, but into how the infrastructure will perform, operate, and affect communities over time. That includes evaluating ongoing community impacts such as noise, vibration, light pollution, public safety, which really could impact and influence the quality of life after the construction is complete. And it encourages consideration of longer-term operational topics such as reducing waste, improving efficiency, planning for long-term monitoring and maintenance activities. Project teams are encouraged to think proactively about monitoring energy and water systems, adding equipment that can do that over time, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollutants during operation, and protecting groundwater resources throughout the operational life of the asset. And resilience is also a major consideration. There's an entire category dedicated to climate and resilience. What part of it looks at emissions and part of it looks at the resilience aspect of the project. And it encourages teams to incorporate strategies that help infrastructure adapt to changing environmental conditions, operational risks, and future community needs. It asks project teams to look at all of those things while designing the project. And stepping back from project-specific perspectives, Envision can support broader organizational sustainability discussions. Many agencies use the framework to not only look at individual process, but also a way to evaluate policies, standards, internal practices more holistically, especially if they're going to be using Envision on multiple projects. And it can help identify opportunities to integrate sustainability more systematically across programs, departments, and long-term infrastructure planning efforts. So in that sense, Envision becomes more than a project tool. It can also help organizations build a stronger culture of sustainability and resilience over time. To further that point, Envision can help agencies and organizations, like I said, step back and look at sustainability and how it's embedded across their broader systems. For example, uh, organizations might use Envision principles within their strategic plan to better account for long-term social, economic, and environmental trends and risks. Some organizations have policies or that include Envision so that it can help establish sustainability management approaches, integrate sustainability milestones into project workflows, look at how they're procuring related to sustainability. And there's a policy map on ISI's website with organizations that have policies related to Envision. And then really taken together, these types of applications can show how Envision can help an organization move from just addressing sustainability on that project by project level to embedding it more systematically into their organizational culture and infrastructure delivery overall. So I wanted to talk quickly just about a few community outcomes, because really at the end of the day, all these organizational improvements focus on better outcomes. And so we'll look at how Envision connects directly to those community engagement and results. So first, as a community engagement aspect, one of really the defining aspects of Envision is its broad recognition of stakeholder engagement as an important component of sustainability performance. So not just a communications exercise, but really looking at how it integrates, because infrastructure projects directly affect people's lives. So the community obviously prioritizes and is concerned about making sure that the outcomes of these projects are successful for the long term. And meaningful engagement can really build trust. It can reduce conflict, strengthen project alignment with the community needs, and really ultimately lead to a more durable and widely supported solutions. Envision encourages project teams to think about engagement early and continuously throughout the project, not just in isolated moments of public outreach, but really as like a continuous activity, and encourages project teams to look at the many types and components of stakeholders. So many definitions of people and communities that might be impacted positively or negatively by the project. In many ways, strong engagement becomes an indicator of the project quality because it reflects how well a project responds to the people and communities it's intended to serve. So a quick look just at the distinction between informing communities and engaging them. Informing is often this one-way communication, sharing project updates, presenting decisions, or providing information after major directions have already been established. But engaging, on the other hand, involves two-way dialogue. It creates opportunities for stakeholders and communities to help shape conversations and identify concerns and contribute to their perspectives earlier in the process. And that difference matters because projects tend to have stronger long-term outcomes when engagement is proactive, inclusive, and collaborative. And communities are more often supportive of projects when they feel heard, when they can see how their input influence decisions. And Envision reinforces that idea that engagement is not just communication, it's about building better projects. It also includes one credit dedicated to stakeholder engagement and a dozen other credits that include engagement on varying levels with various types of stakeholders.
Uh, I'm gonna jump in just really quickly because we've had a really
Yeah,
interesting question from the audience. So for a
okay.
multi-building campus project that seeks both lead and envision, so that joint, dovetailing of the two programs, does Envision stop applying for all components of the building? For projects that include publicly owned buildings and public infrastructure, does the project boundary include the building's utilities? Interesting question.
Right. It's so the project boundary is always up to the project team. And so you could, if you had buildings and infrastructure, you could just have the infrastructure be within the project boundary, or you could include the buildings. But if you include the buildings, you do have to include everything. So you would have to include the materials, the energy use, the water use. Um, so so the project team gets to make that decision. I worked on a project here. I live in Omaha, and I worked on a project here for the Omaha riverfront, and it's 3 parks with infrastructure in them. And at the time, they thought there might be buildings, but they weren't sure. They ended up with, I think, 2 restrooms. So we had to make a determination about the project boundary. So we didn't look at the buildings because they weren't defined, and we didn't know what they were going to be, and it was too difficult to try to figure something out without understanding exactly what they were. So we were able to just say we're dealing with everything else here, landscaping, all the water issues, any other kinds of facilities that were there. There was a lot of um, furniture and um, collaborative spaces and things like that, but not the buildings because we didn't know what they were. So as long as the project team defines that and it's understood and it's consistently used across all of the credits, then you can say buildings or no buildings.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, so I want to make sure I have time for a few questions. So I'll be quick about these last few. Um, so just to kind of conclude talking about outcomes and value creation, one of the most important shifts in infrastructure sustainability is really moving beyond this activity-based thinking and focusing more directly on outcomes and long-term value creation. Whereas traditional projects may have been evaluating cost, schedule, technical delivery, and of course those factors are still important and they're still looking at them. Organizations really increasingly ask broader questions about long-term performance and community value. So they might be asking questions like, does this improve resilience? Does it support equity and accessibility? Does it reduce long-term risks? Does it create environmental or social benefits over time? And Envision helps teams evaluate those kinds of outcomes in a more structured and measurable way. And in many cases, the framework changes not only what teams evaluate, but how they think about project success. So as previously mentioned, one of those tenets of Envision is going beyond asking, are we doing the project right, to are we doing the right project, which comes when those questions happen really early in the project process. Before, I'm going to show a couple of project examples really quick, but it's helpful to step back and consider just the broader benefits that organizations see. So these are benefits that we've collected that organizations have talked about within, after they've done projects. And every project is different, and many teams find that the framework helps improve collaboration, strengthen decision-making, identify opportunities for better long-term performance, support more resilient and community-focused outcomes. And the couple of case studies that I'll show illustrate how those benefits can take shape across different project types and contexts. The first one, the Eastern Regional Infrastructure Project, which is in Gwinnett County, Georgia, addresses critical community needs related to water, sewer, and trail infrastructure. So an interesting multi-benefit project. And the county really prioritized sustainability and design during design and construction. And by implementing a project sustainability plan and integrating Envision with planned verification from procurement all the way through operations. And the new sewer infrastructure here allows for future decommissioning of several wastewater pump stations. It improves overall efficiency while improving system resilience. And the new 5-mile trail system is co-located with a gravity sewer line, effectively integrating civil infrastructure with a new community recreational asset. The second project is the Oxford Retention Basin, which is a flood control facility operated by the LA County Flood Control District. And this is, again, a multi-benefit project. We see this a lot, which modernized a 10.7-acre facility to improve local water quality, flood protection, and ecological health. And it involved construction of a meandering berm to facilitate circulation of local urban runoff and tidal flows throughout the basin to sustain a habitat for native plants and wildlife and add observation areas, educational signage, park benches, walkways, with eco-friendly lighting and bike paths around the periphery. And then the last little case study is the city and county of Denver's East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project, which delivers a center running BRT service along East Colfax Avenue from Broadway to Yosemite. And it has dedicated transit lane, enhanced stations, and improved pedestrian and bicycle connections. And this BRT project will reduce transit travel times by up to 30 minutes, expand affordable and reliable access to more than 250,000 jobs and community services, and enhance comfort and safety, and support placemaking, economic development opportunities all along the corridor. And I know I mentioned verification a couple times. So while we definitely support the use of Envision for all projects, and there is no cost to use it, it can be used as an internal planning and decision support tool. Some projects choose to pursue the optional third-party verification, and this can be a really good option for projects, even if project teams aren't doing it for all projects, to get kind of a temperature of what they're doing to make sure that, you know, they're not just patting themselves on the back, and make sure that a third party agrees with what they're saying. Provides formal recognition for sustainability achievements, helps demonstrate projects' commitment to long-term performance. It's a peer review process, essentially, so it allows project teams to calibrate and validate their self-assessments, as I was mentioning. And for communities and stakeholders, verification can help demonstrate how the project is addressing priorities and concerns. For public agencies and utilities, it can provide additional confidence to ratepayers and funding partners that assessments are being made thoughtfully and in the public's best interest. And many organizations find that pursuing verification helps motivate and align the project team around shared goals while providing an added layer of quality control and quality assessment throughout the project development. So verification isn't just about recognition. It can strengthen accountability, transparency, and project performance if used correctly. I'm going to pop through a couple tools and resources. This is the policy map that I mentioned. So that's on our website. So you can see policies that public agencies have developed using that reference Envision. ISI also has a supplier directory that we're beginning to populate, which has to organizations that have products and services related to Envision, and each one has to be connected to at least one of the Envision credits. This is the Envision Credit Navigator tool that I mentioned that shows Envision use across the project timeline. I know that one's a little bit overwhelming. And we also have, like I mentioned, a lot of white papers and guides and things that can help people get more information about Envision and how it's applied within projects. I mentioned earlier too the ENVSP credential. So that's a credential that people can do training for online or in live workshops and do an exam to get that credential. And then I always just like to give a little bit of a plug for our annual conference, which is free and virtual, held in November. The speaker abstract window is open right now through the end of the month, and registration is already open. So if you're interested in hearing more about Envision from practitioners, that's a great opportunity to learn more. All right, so with that, I guess I'll just leave the last couple minutes for if there's any other questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Yeah, if there are any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A function. If you think of a question after the session is over, don't worry, please just reach out and I will make sure that Jennifer gets your question. Don't want anyone walking away with an unanswered question. That's my worst nightmare. But I have dropped a couple of the resources that Jennifer referenced in her slides in the chat as well. And I'll include those in the correspondence that goes out after this session. Not seeing any questions in the uh, not seeing any open questions at the moment. Oh, we've got one here. In addition to the projects you presented, do you have any examples of standout projects in which using Envision resulted in a change of the nature or goals of the project? In other words, a change in what the right project was determined to be. Oh, that's interesting.
That is interesting. Um, I'm not sure if I have any, well, I won't say that. I'm not sure that I have any examples in what the right project itself is, but I do know several projects that use Envision for things like looking for sites. So they used
Mhm.
Envision as uh, in the alternatives analysis to determine which site they wanted to site it on. Uh, there's two power plants that Alliant did in Iowa. One's called Marshalltown and one's called West Riverside. And I think both of those used Envision as an alternatives analysis tool to determine which site didn't have in species of concern,
Mhm.
high ecological function, prime farmland. They kind of used a lot of the natural world credits to look at, where the best place to put those would be. Um, I think I've seen that not as much in necessarily is it the right project, but like, is this component the right thing for us to do? So a lot of those ideas come from, I think, both stakeholder engagement component of here's several opportunities that we have, and which one of these is going to be the best option for this project to um, put into design,
Mhm.
as well as different types of equipment. There was one project that I was working on, it just recently actually was verified, but where they had to change how the project was configured. So they kind of used Envision criteria to look at that, and they ended up being able to reduce the amount um, of earth movement that they did by like just an incredible amount. So not only did they not have to do the work of removing the dirt to place the equipment, in farther in the ground,
Mhm.
they also got to reduce the amount of trucking they would have had to do to take earthwork, to take dirt off the site, and all of those kinds of things. So I know that's not probably an exact answer to your question, but there are a lot of instances. The one thing I will say about that is a lot of times if people do integrate it early, they make those decisions and then they don't really consider them to be like specifically related to Envision. And so we don't necessarily always hear those stories.
Mhm.
So the best ones that I have are the projects I was involved in because people tend to take them for granted a little bit, I think.
It's true. It's true. And I mean, one of the things that I love about frameworks like Envision and LEAD, it really does give tier twos, tier threes, subcontractors a chance to shine, really, because, GCs and people designing these projects, they don't have enough forethought to think if we want to go for all of these credits, here's what we're going to do at every single level for every single credit. They just can't. So when you get these subcontractors coming in, be like, oh, we can address this issue. It gives them a chance to not only help the project, but it's something great that they can showcase afterwards.
Yeah, a good story that they can tell about how they made an impact on a project.
Exactly. We love a good case study. If there are no other questions, I think we'll wrap up just on time. I love it. I love it. We're on time. Look, this is perfect. Like I said, if there are any other questions that you think of after the fact, just reach out, and we're happy to answer your question through email. And again, just another reminder of the June 11th session on implementing sustainable infrastructure in practice. That'll be another great session. And, not just sustainable infrastructure related, the school is always putting on training sessions on all different kinds of issues. We have one on data centers coming up in June. We do carbon reporting, we do human rights and forced labor, lots of training available for you to take, and it's all free at the point of use. So, with all of that said, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you again so much for attending, and Jennifer, like so grateful that you were able to join today's session and give this presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.